Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. Today, I wanted to talk about a really cool and lesser known Bigfoot story. This one has definitely been overshadowed by stories such as the Albert Ostman case, which the story I'm about to tell you actually took place 4 years after that case. And if you're not familiar with Albert Ostman, he was a prospector. Back in 1924, he was apparently kidnapped by Sasquatch while he was out in the remote forests of the British Columbia West Coast. A creature came along in the middle of the night, picked up his sleeping bag, which he was in, and walked off. And he ended up spending multiple days with a group of 4 Sasquatch before he was able to make an escape. Now, this story I'm going to tell you is the story of Mushalot Harry, or Mushalot Harry. I've heard probably 3 or 4 different ways of pronouncing that word, so I'm just going to do it my way, which, could very well be a mispronunciation, but anyways, Mushalot Harry, he was a First Nations fella. Back in 1928 is when this story takes place. He was a First Nations fella. Apparently he was, very, very physically fit, just a really hard guy. Like, he would spend long periods of time out in the woods, in the deep woods, which was kind of against what his people were known to do. I guess they were very apprehensive about ever journeying deep into the woods, because apparently they were already aware of these Sasquatch creatures. They were scared to go out into the woods, and it just wasn't something that they would do. But Mushalot Harry, that was kind of his thing. And he ignored the warnings that he got from, the villagers and the village elders. And he went off on an expedition to do some trapping. So the Connemara River, the head of the Connemara River, I believe that's how you pronounce that, is where he was headed. And it was his favorite hunting spot. It was actually quite a long journey from the village where he was from to this river. It was a long canoe journey up this inlet. I think it was something like 45 miles or something crazy like that. But he ventured out there on his own, and I guess once he got to the head of the river, he stashed his canoe, and he trekked, up the river for something like 12 miles. So a very long hike. 12 miles is, I think we're getting close to 20 kilometers, if you're from Canada. 20 kilometers is pretty far. I think it's something like almost 19 and a half kilometers, actually. But nonetheless, anything over 10 miles is pretty far to be hiking, especially in the British Columbia terrain. If you take a plane and you fly over those areas on the west coast of Vancouver Island, it's pretty rugged. There's no flat land. If it's not ocean water, it's like mountainous or very hilly topography. So I can't imagine his journey was very easy. But anyways, he hikes up 12 miles, and eventually he sets up, his camp. And basically what happened is he one night was sleeping. He was in, his underwear only. He was wrapped up in blankets. And in the middle of the night, something came along, one of these Bigfoot creatures, and grabbed him and carried him off like 2 or 3 miles. He said it wasn't very far. So it's not like the Albert Ostman story where, he didn't really know where he was being carried off to. He, was being carried for a long while, which would be very scary. But Mushalot Harry was, he wasn't taken too far away. But eventually he's taken to this area where there is a family of nearly 20 of these Bigfoot creatures. So in Albert Ostman's story, you have 4 creatures. In this story, there's like upwards of 20, which is like a little clan or a village of Bigfoot. I don't know. Very wild. And to think if this story's true, imagining there being an area where there's 20 of these creatures hanging out, imagine stumbling upon that. It'd be very crazy. But anyways, he's taken to this camp, He's dropped off, and these creatures, they don't hurt him. They're not really violent or threatening, but he's scared. Like, he's frightened, obviously, as anyone would be. You don't know what these creatures are, and there's 20 of them, and there's one of you, and they just picked you up and carried you to this remote location. Anyone would be terrified. But they're very curious. They're curious, and they're like trying to touch him. They're picking at his clothes and pulling his clothes because they don't know what they are. Morning passes, and it's the afternoon. And I guess, according to the story, I don't know why, but these creatures kind of let him be. I guess the understanding is most of them went out during the day, out of their little camp, and were foraging or doing whatever it is that Bigfoot creatures do during the day. But he's basically left unguarded. So he decides he's going to make a break, and he hauls out of there. He knew the general direction of where his camp was, and he was able to make it to his camp. He ended up running right by his camp. And this is the unbelievable part to me, is that he ran barefoot. Because remember, he was picked up in his blankets, in his underwear. That's all he had on, was his underwear. He ran past his camp, didn't stop for any of his stuff, and went straight for his canoe, which was 12 miles away. Almost 20 kilometers. Could you imagine running through the British Columbia forests, or any forest for that matter, anywhere outdoors basically, with bare feet for that long? Like, that would be brutal. I can't imagine doing that. That part to me alone just seems kind of unbelievable. Makes me kind of suspicious of the story, but I don't know. And not only did he run that 12 miles, but he got in his canoe and then had to paddle 45 miles back to his village, which he did. Now, I don't know how long it took. I don't know how long the journey was. I'm assuming that was done over the course of a few days, probably. I can't imagine anyone running for 12 miles and then paddling for 45 more miles. That would be insane. I'm sure he stopped along the way for breaks. He gets back to the village. I mean, when he arrives, it's something like 3 o'clock in the morning. And in the village, there was a gentleman. He was a missionary priest. He was known as Father Anthony. But he woke up to, crying and like wailing noises down by the shore of the inlet. And they went to investigate, and they found Mushalat Harry just basically petrified. This guy had experienced something that no one would ever imagine experiencing, really. He was apparently just in incredible shock from the fear of what just happened, and of course there was a lot of physical stress involved. Like, he had to make quite a journey, so the whole time, feeling like he's running away from something or some things that could easily tear him apart. I also forgot to mention, I want to say now, that when he was in that camp, apparently there was bones of all kinds on the ground. So he had it in his head that these things were going to eat him. He thought that's what they were going to do, which, we don't know what they were going to do. It didn't seem like they had that much of a plan. Like, they didn't really know what they were going to do with him. They just kind of left him there, so who knows? But, and they were Sasquatch creatures of all shapes and sizes, basically, and genders. Just a wide variety of these creatures. But he gets back to the camp. They find him at the shore, and he's totally terrified. I guess it took something like 3 weeks for him to fully recover from the incident. And here's the kicker. They claim that Mushalat Harry's hair over the course of that 3 weeks turned pure white. I guess from the stress and the fear. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know of that really happening to anyone, but I haven't really looked into it. So if anyone can shed some light on that, if stress severe stress can change someone's hair to pure white over the course of 3 weeks, I would like to know if that's possible. But that's the kind of other crazy part of the story, that really gets people at the end. But he was apparently pretty quiet about it, and eventually he told this Father Anthony gentleman, and the story kind of got out from there. But very crazy. You don't hear this one very often. You hear the Albert Ostman story, you hear the Ape Canyon story. Those are the two, I guess, big historical Bigfoot tales that you will hear. And the Mushalat Harry story only comes to light every so often. But I find it still kind of interesting. I mean, you have to also take into account that this happened 4 years after the Ape Canyon incident. So I guess it's possible that he heard that story and kind of wanted to tell his own tale. If it was made up, if it was a hoax, there is no way to find out. But this story, I guess, was investigated by the famous Peter Byrne, Bigfoot researcher. So I don't know. It's very hard to tell. The thing that sets this story apart from the Albert Ostman story is that there's other people involved that can verify certain things, right? So there's this Father Anthony guy. And in Albert Ostman's story, it's just his word. So, who knows? Cool story nonetheless. Great campfire story. If there is a place out there, I mean, you can go to this location. You can go to the head of that river, the Connemara River. I think there's a hatchery there, according to Google Earth. I guess hike 12 miles up there. If you look on the map, 12 miles... a little bit less than 12 miles from the head of the river, it looks like there's a big lake. So I don't know, he could have been camped out somewhere around there. Maybe it'd be worth someone going there and checking it out, and setting up a camp on the ground with blankets, and see if you can recreate this story. Yeah, I guess before I close this, I want to say again, if you haven't checked out the Lone Crow podcast by my friend Doug Mackay, he has an episode up there on the Wendigo. I talked about it at the beginning of my last video. If you haven't checked it out, click the link below and have a listen. It's definitely worth the time. So check that out. Subscribe to his channel. If you haven't subscribed to this channel already, please do that. Share it. Get these videos out there. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries.